The thunder rolled across the Montana territory as Dahlia Winters clutched what remained of her once fine dress, the tattered silk clinging to her mudded skin. 3 days of running had led her here, a nowhere place between two somewheres, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small bundle of possessions tied in a handkerchief. The stagecoach that had been carrying her west had been ambushed by bandits hours ago, leaving her stranded in this vast, unforgiving landscape of 1876. She had walked until her feet bled, until finally her legs had given out near this lonely way station, little more than a wooden structure with a crooked sign that read, "Blue Creek Stop." The tears had long since dried on her cheeks, leaving trails through the dust that coated her face. What remained of her carefully pinned hair had come loose, tumbling in tangled waves down her back. The sound of hoofbeats made her tense, her fingers instinctively tightening around the small Derringer pistol hidden in the folds of her ruined skirt, the only thing of value she had managed to keep from the bandits. A rider approached, his form gradually taking shape through the veil of dust kicked up by his horse. Tall in the saddle, broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten hat pulled low over his eyes, Dahlia raised her chin, determined not to appear as defeated as she felt. She would not give this stranger potential threat or salvation the satisfaction of seeing her fear. The horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion, came to a stop a few paces from where she sat. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He approached slowly as one might a wounded animal. "Miss," he said, his voice deep and rough like stone over stone. "You all right?" Dahlia laughed bitterly, gesturing to her torn dress and disheveled appearance. "Do I look all right to you, sir?" The stranger crouched down before her, and Dahlia got her first clear view of his face, strong jaw darkened by stubble, eyes the color of a storm-tossed sea, and a scar that ran from his temple to his cheekbone. He studied her with an intensity that should have made her uncomfortable, but somehow didn't. "You look stronger than any silk," he said quietly, surprising her with the unexpected gentleness in his assessment. The words settled over her like a warm blanket, and something in Dahlia's chest loosened just slightly. She had been raised to be ornamental, a delicate flower in Boston society. No one had ever described her as strong before. "My name's Reid MacKenzie," he continued, offering her a canteen of water. "And I reckon you've had quite a day." Dahlia accepted the water gratefully, taking a measured sip despite her desperate thirst. "Dahlia Winters," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "And it's been more than a day, Mr. MacKenzie. It's been 3. Reid's eyebrows rose slightly. "3 days out here on your own. Well, Miss Winters, that just proves my point about your strength." He glanced around, taking in the desolate surroundings. "Mind telling me what brings a Boston lady? Don't look surprised. Your accent gives you a way out to this particular circle of hell." Dahlia hesitated. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not after everything. But something about Reid MacKenzie's steady gaze made her want to tell him the truth. "Stagecoach was attacked," she said, each word carefully chosen. "I managed to get away during the chaos. Been walking ever since, hoping to find civilization." Reid nodded, not pressing for details she clearly wasn't offering. "Blue Creek's about half a day's ride from here," he said. "Not much of a town, but it's got a hotel and a telegraph office. I can take you there." Dahlia's fingers tightened around the Derringer in her skirts. "And why would you do that, Mr. MacKenzie? What do you expect in return?" A flash of something, perhaps respect, crossed his features. "Nothing, Miss Winters. Contrary to what you might think of frontier men, some of us still believe in helping those in need without expecting payment." He stood, extending a hand to her. "So, what'll it be?" "You can sit here in the dust hoping the next person who comes along is as gentlemanly as me, or you can accept my help and be in a proper bed by nightfall." Dahlia looked at his outstretched hand, calloused and sun-darkened. She had left Boston to escape one man's control only to find herself at the mercy of another. But something told her Reid MacKenzie was different. "Very well," she said, placing her hand in his and allowing him to pull her to her feet. "But I warn you, Mr. MacKenzie, I still have my wits about me." "And this?" She revealed the derringer briefly before tucking it away again, Reid's mouth quirked up at one corner, not quite a smile but close. "I'd expect nothing less, Miss Winters." He turned to his horse, adjusting the saddle. "Now, can you ride?" "I was raised with the finest riding instructors in New England," Dahlia replied, a touch of her old pride seeping into her voice. Reid looked over his shoulder at her, that almost smile still playing on his lips. "This ain't New England, Miss Winters, but I reckon you'll manage just fine." He helped her onto the horse before swinging up behind her, his chest a solid wall of warmth against her back. As they set off toward Blue Creek, Dahlia found herself wondering if her journey west had just become more complicated, or if perhaps, against all odds, she had found an unexpected ally in this wilderness. The rhythm of the horse beneath them lulled Dahlia into a strange comfort. Despite the impropriety of their position, a proper lady would never ride pressed against a strange man. She found herself relaxing slightly, the exhaustion of her ordeal catching up with her. "You can sleep if you need to," Reid said, his voice rumbling through his chest against her back. "I won't let you fall." Dahlia straightened her spine. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you," she felt rather than heard his chuckle. "Stubborn as a mule, aren't you?" "I prefer to think of it as resilient," she replied. "Fair enough." Reid adjusted his hold on the reins, his arms creating a secure cradle around her without actually touching her more than necessary. "Mind if I ask what brought you out west in the first place? Boston ladies don't usually venture this far into the frontier without good reason." Dahlia considered deflecting again but found herself too tired for pretense. "I was to be a mail-order bride," she admitted, the words bitter on her tongue. "My father's business failed, there were debts, a marriage was arranged, and the lucky groom, a man named James Harrington. A cattle baron in Wyoming territory, or so I was told. I've never met him." Dahlia stared at the horizon. "I had few options, Mr. MacKenzie. It was this or alternatives I found unacceptable." Reid was quiet for a moment. "And now, after the stagecoach attack, now I have even fewer options." Dahlia's laugh held no humor. "But I refuse to arrive on Mr. Harrington's doorstep like this, penniless, disheveled, with nothing to my name. I have my pride, if little else." "Pride's worth something out here," Reid said, "more than fancy dresses and proper manners anyway." They rode in silence for a while, the landscape gradually changing as they moved from open prairie to more varied terrain with scattered trees and rocky outcroppings. Dahlia found herself studying Reid's hands on the reins, strong, capable hands that nonetheless handled the horse with gentle expertise. "What about you, Mr. MacKenzie?" she finally asked. "What's your story?" "Not much to tell," he replied. "Born in Texas. Fought for the South in the war when I was barely old enough to hold a rifle. Been drifting since, taking work where I can find it." "And what work do you do now?" "This and that. Currently, I'm working as a ranch hand for the Double Bar, about 20 miles from Blue Creek." Something in his tone made Dahlia suspect there was more to his story than he was sharing, but she didn't press. They all had their secrets. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the first scattered buildings of Blue Creek came into view. It was indeed a small town, a single main street with wooden buildings lining both sides, a church steeple visible at one end. "It's not much," Reid said, "but it's safer than where I found you." Dahlia took in the frontier town with a mixture of trepidation and relief. "It has walls and a roof." "That's enough for now." Reid guided the horse down the main street, drawing curious glances from the townspeople they passed. Dahlia was acutely aware of her appearance, her torn dress and disheveled hair marking her as someone in distress. She held her head high nonetheless, refusing to cower under their scrutiny. They stopped in front of a 2-story building with a sign that read Blue Creek Hotel. Reid dismounted first, then reached up to help Dahlia down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground. Stiff from the ride and weak from her ordeal, Reid's hands steadied her, strong and sure on her waist. "Easy now," he murmured, close enough that only she could hear. "You've made it this far." Dahlia nodded, gathering her remaining strength. "Thank you, Mr. MacKenzie, for everything." "Don't thank me yet," he replied, leading her toward the hotel entrance. "Let's get you settled first." The hotel lobby was simple but clean, with a worn wooden counter and a wall of keys behind it. A middle-aged woman looked up as they entered, her eyebrows rising at Dahlia's appearance. "Mrs. Porter," Reid greeted her. "The lady needs a room and perhaps a bath and a meal." Mrs. Porter's gaze softened as she took in Dahlia's state. "Of course, stagecoach trouble, dear." "Yes," Dahlia answered simply, not wanting to elaborate. "Well, you're safe now," Mrs. Porter said, reaching for a key. "Room 3 is available. It's small but comfortable." Reid stepped forward. "Put it on my account, please." Dahlia turned to him, ready to protest, but he silenced her with a look. "You can repay me when you're back on your feet," he said quietly. "Consider it a loan if your pride requires it." Dahlia swallowed her objection, knowing she had no alternative. "A loan, then. Thank you." Mrs. Porter nodded. "I'll have hot water sent up for a bath right away and some food after. I might have a dress that could fit you too, dear. Nothing fancy, mind you." "Anything would be appreciated," Dahlia said sincerely. Reid cleared his throat. "I'll leave you in Mrs. Porter's capable hands then. I've got some business to attend to in town." Dahlia felt a surprising pang at his imminent departure. Will I see you again, Mr. MacKenzie?" Something flickered in his eyes. "I'll check on you tomorrow, Miss Winters. Make sure you're settling in all right." With that, he touched the brim of his hat in farewell and strode out of the hotel, leaving Dahlia with the strange feeling that she had just lost something she hadn't known she wanted to keep. Mrs. Porter guided her upstairs to a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "Rest now, dear," the older woman said kindly. "Things always look better after a bath and a meal." Left alone, Dahlia moved to the window just in time to see Reid MacKenzie mounting his horse. He paused, looking up toward the hotel, and for a moment she thought he might have seen her. Then he turned away, spurring his horse down the street until he disappeared from view. Dahlia sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of her exhaustion. She had survived. She was safe, at least for now. And tomorrow she would see Reid MacKenzie again. That thought provided more comfort than it should have. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, rousing Dahlia from the deepest sleep she'd had in days. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind, the unfamiliar room, the distant sounds of a town awakening. Then memory returned, the stagecoach attack, 3 days in the wilderness, and Reid MacKenzie. She sat up, pushing tangled hair from her face. The bath Mrs. Porter had provided the night before had washed away the dust and grime, but couldn't erase the bone-deep weariness that lingered. Still, Dahlia felt more human than she had since the attack. A knock at the door startled her. "Miss Winters," Mrs. Porter's voice called, "I've brought you some breakfast and that dress I mentioned." Dahlia wrapped the thin blanket around herself before opening the door. Mrs. Porter entered with a tray of food and a folded bundle of fabric. "It's one of my daughter's dresses," the woman explained, laying the garment on the bed. "She's married and living in Denver now. It's simple but clean and whole." Dahlia ran her fingers over the calico fabric, practical, sturdy, nothing like the fine silks and satins she was accustomed to. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "Thank you." "Eat while it's hot," Mrs. Porter instructed, gesturing to the tray, "and when you're ready, come downstairs. Mr. Jenkins at the general store said he'd advance you some basic necessities on credit. Seems Mr. MacKenzie had a word with him." Dahlia's eyes widened. "He did," Mrs. Porter nodded, a knowing look in her eyes. "Reid MacKenzie doesn't do things by halves when he takes an interest. Now eat." After the older woman left, Dahlia ate the simple breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits with more appetite than she'd had in days. The dress fit well enough, a bit loose in the bodice and short at the ankles, but serviceable. She used the small mirror above the washstand to pin up her hair as best she could, trying to restore some semblance of her former appearance. Downstairs, the small hotel dining room was empty save for a lone figure by the window. Reid MacKenzie sat with his back to the wall, a cup of coffee in front of him, his hat resting on the table. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression made Dahlia's heart beat a little faster. "Miss Winters," he said, rising to his feet, "you look rested." Amazing what a bath and a real bed can accomplish, she replied, taking the seat across from him when he pulled it out for her. I understand I have you to thank for more than just the ride to town. Reid shrugged, the gesture oddly elegant for such a rugged man. Just making sure you have what you need until you decide your next move. A young girl brought Dahlia a cup of coffee without being asked, suggesting Reid had been waiting for her. And what do you imagine that next move might be? She asked after thanking the girl. That depends. Reid studied her over the rim of his cup. Are you still planning to meet your intended? The question hung between them, weighted with implications Dahlia wasn't ready to examine. I don't see that I have much choice, she finally said. As you pointed out, I have few options. No money, no family here, no skills that would earn me a respectable living in a place like this. You could telegraph him, Reid suggested. Explain what happened, ask him to send funds for your continued journey. Dahlia considered this. Yes, I suppose I could. Though appearing as a burden before we've even met hardly seems the way to begin a marriage. Better than not beginning it at all. She looked up sharply, caught by something in his tone. Do you have an alternative to suggest, Mr. MacKenzie? Reid set down his cup, his expression unreadable. The double bar is looking for a housekeeper. Mrs. Taylor, who's been cooking for the hands, is getting on in years and could use the help. It wouldn't pay much, but it would give you time to consider your options. You're suggesting I become a servant rather than a wife. Dahlia couldn't keep the edge from her voice. I'm suggesting you give yourself choices, Reid countered. A few weeks of honest work while you decide if marrying a stranger is really what you want. Dahlia wanted to be offended by his presumption, but found she couldn't summon the indignation. Instead, she felt a strange relief at the possibility of postponing her meeting with James Harrington. The owner wouldn't mind hiring someone with no experience, she asked. Frank Dunn's a good man. Hard but fair, he values people who work hard more than those with experience. Reid leaned forward slightly. And I'd vouch for you. Dahlia wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, absorbing its warmth. Why are you doing this, Mr. MacKenzie? Why help a stranger to this extent? Reid was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. Maybe I don't like the idea of someone like you being forced into a marriage out of desperation, he finally said. Or maybe I just think everyone deserves a choice in their own fate. There was something in his words, or perhaps what he wasn't saying, that made Dahlia suspect he knew more about forced choices than he let on. I'll consider it, she said. But first, I should at least send Mr. Harrington a telegram informing him of the delay. Reid nodded, seemingly satisfied. Fair enough. The telegraph office is just down the street. I can take you there after you've visited the general store. They walked through Blue Creek side by side, drawing curious glances from the townspeople. Dahlia was acutely aware of Reid's presence beside her, tall, solid, somehow both intimidating to others and reassuring to her. At the general store, Mr. Jenkins greeted them warmly, allowing Dahlia to select the basic necessities she would need: a hairbrush, soap, a nightgown, and a few other items. Put it on my account, Reid told the shopkeeper when Dahlia had made her selections. I can add it to your loan, she told him quietly as they left the store. Reid's mouth quirked in that almost smile, if it makes you feel better. At the telegraph office, Dahlia composed a brief message to James Harrington, explaining the stagecoach attack and her current situation in Blue Creek, without mentioning Reid or the possibility of delaying her arrival further. She requested confirmation of his continued interest in their arrangement. As the operator counted out the words, Dahlia felt Reid watching her. What? She asked. Nothing, he said. Just wondering what kind of man would agree to marry a woman he's never met. The practical kind, Dahlia replied. The same kind as women who agree to marry men they've never met. It's an arrangement of mutual benefit. And what benefit do you get, besides escape from your father's debts? The question was too personal, too probing, but Dahlia found herself answering anyway. Security. A home, perhaps eventually children. She met his gaze directly. The things most women want, Mr. MacKenzie, and love, he asked quietly. Is that not among the things most women want? Dahlia looked away. Love is a luxury like silk dresses and French perfume, nice to have but not necessary for survival. Reid said nothing to that, but she could feel the weight of his disagreement in his silence. They spent the rest of the day addressing Dahlia's immediate needs, purchasing a second dress from the dressmaker who promised to have it ready by the next day, arranging for her torn dress to be mended as best it could be, and securing a small valise for her belongings. As the sun began to set, they returned to the hotel where Reid had arranged to meet Frank Dunn, the owner of the Double Bar Ranch. Dunn was waiting in the small dining room, a weathered man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Dahlia carefully. "Miss Winters," he greeted her, standing as they approached. "Reid here tells me you're looking for work." "Temporarily," Dahlia clarified, glancing at Reid. "While I sort out my arrangements," Dunn nodded. "Don't much care if it's temporary so long as the work gets done while you're there." "Can you cook?" "Basic meals," Dahlia admitted. "Nothing fancy. Can you clean, mend, keep accounts?" "Yes to all three." Dunn looked satisfied. "That's more than we have now. Mrs. Taylor's arthritis means she can barely knead bread these days, let alone manage the rest of the household. I can offer room, board, and $10 a month." It was less than a housemaid would make in Boston, but Dahlia knew frontier economics were different. "That seems fair," she said. "Good, we can leave tomorrow morning if that suits." Dunn glanced at Reid. "MacKenzie can bring you out." After Dunn left, Dahlia turned to Reid. "You arranged all this before even knowing if I'd agree," Reid shrugged. "I figured you'd see the sense in it. You're very sure of yourself, Mr. MacKenzie. Have to be out here." He hesitated, then added, "I'll be around the ranch, you know. If you need anything." The knowledge that she would continue to see him brought an unexpected warmth to Dahlia's chest. "I appreciate that," Reid nodded, seeming almost uncomfortable with her gratitude. "I should let you rest. Big day tomorrow." As he turned to leave, Dahlia called after him, "Mr. MacKenzie." When he looked back, she asked the question that had been bothering her all day. "Why did you really stop when you saw me sitting in the dust?" Reid's expression softened slightly. "Because everyone deserves a helping hand when they're down, Miss Winters. Even Boston ladies in torn silk dresses." With that, he touched the brim of his hat and walked out, leaving Dahlia with the distinct impression that there was far more to Reid MacKenzie than met the eye, and that discovering what lay beneath his rugged exterior might be more dangerous to her heart than anything she had faced in the wilderness. The Double Bar Ranch sprawled across the rolling hills 20 miles outside Blue Creek, a collection of sturdy log buildings surrounding a main house that, while modest by Eastern standards, represented substantial prosperity for the Montana Territory. As Reid helped Dahlia down from the wagon that had transported her belongings and supplies for the ranch, she took in her new temporary home with a mixture of trepidation and curiosity. "It's larger than I expected," she admitted, adjusting her bonnet against the midday sun. "Frank started with nothing 15 years ago," Reid explained, lifting her valise from the wagon bed. "Built it all up from a single parcel of land and 20 head of cattle. Now he runs nearly 2,000 head and employs 15 men year-round, more during Roundup." The pride in Reid's voice suggested he had been with the Double Bar for some time, though he had described himself as a drifter. Another contradiction in the complex man who had become her unexpected champion, Mrs. Taylor met them at the door of the main house, a thin woman with silver hair and gnarled hands that spoke of years of hard work. Despite her obvious physical discomfort, her eyes were sharp and assessing as they swept over Dahlia. "So you're the Boston lady," she said without preamble. "Reid says you've had some troubles." "Yes, madam," Dahlia replied, straightening her shoulders, "but I'm ready to work." Mrs. Taylor's expression softened slightly. "Good, we don't need another delicate flower around here. Come on in, I'll show you your room and the kitchen." Reid set Dahlia's valise just inside the door. "I'll leave you ladies to get acquainted. I've got work to do out in the north pasture." Before Dahlia could thank him again, he was gone, striding toward the stables with the easy gait of a man comfortable in his own skin. She watched him for a moment too long, only turning away when Mrs. Taylor cleared her throat meaningfully. "That one's a puzzle." the older woman remarked, leading Dahlia into the house. Been here 3 years and still don't know much about him beyond that he works harder than 2 men and never complains. He saved my life, Dahlia said simply, or at least my immediate future. Mrs. Taylor glanced back at her. Then you're one of the lucky ones. Reid MacKenzie doesn't let many people close. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, polished wood floors covered with woven rugs, sturdy furniture built for use rather than show, and windows that let in ample light. Mrs. Taylor showed Dahlia to a small but clean bedroom off the kitchen, explaining that, as the housekeeper, she would be expected to be up before the ranch hands to prepare breakfast and available until after the evening meal was cleared. Sundays are lighter, Mrs. Taylor explained. Most of the men ride into town if they're not on essential duties. You'll have time to yourself then. The kitchen was the heart of the house, a large room with a massive cast iron stove, a well-scrubbed table that could seat 12, and open shelving stocked with provisions. Mrs. Taylor showed Dahlia where everything was kept, explaining the rhythm of meals and the preferences of the ranch owner and the hands. Most aren't picky, she said. Working from sunup to sundown builds an appetite that doesn't care much what fills it. But good food keeps good men, that's what Frank always says. By the time evening approached, Dahlia's head was spinning with information, but she was determined to prove herself useful. She insisted on helping with supper, kneading the bread dough that Mrs. Taylor's arthritic hands struggled with, and chopping vegetables for the stew that would feed the ranch hands. You're a quick study, Mrs. Taylor observed, watching Dahlia work. Not afraid to get your hands dirty either. That'll serve you well here. My mother died when I was 12, Dahlia explained, focusing on the carrots she was cutting. Father never remarried. I learned to manage a household young, though we had servants for the heavier work. And yet here you are, chopping carrots in a frontier kitchen. Mrs. Taylor shook her head. Life takes strange turns, doesn't it? Indeed it does, Dahlia agreed, thinking of how just a week ago she had been on her way to marry a stranger. And now she was working as a housekeeper on a cattle ranch, all because a taciturn cowboy had stopped to help a woman sitting in the dust. As the ranch hands began filing in for supper, Dahlia found herself searching for Reid among them. He came in among the last group, his shirt dusty from the day's work, his hair damp as if he'd quickly washed up before coming to the table. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement before taking his seat among the other men throughout the meal. As she helped Mrs. Taylor serve the food, Dahlia was acutely aware of Reid's presence. He spoke little, but the other hands seemed to respect him, making space for him at the table and including him in their conversations even when he only responded with a word or two. After the meal, as the men drifted out to the bunkhouse or to smoke on the porch, Reid lingered, approaching Dahlia as she cleared the last of the plates. "How was your first day?" he asked, his voice low enough that Mrs. Taylor, dozed in a chair by the stove, couldn't hear. "Busy," Dahlia admitted, "but good. Mrs. Taylor has been very helpful," Reid nodded, glancing at the sleeping woman. "She's been the heart of this place for a long time. Frank's wife died in childbirth their first year here, the baby too. Mrs. Taylor's been running the household ever since." "That's terrible," Dahlia said softly, thinking of the silent grief the ranch owner must carry. "To lose everything like that." "Not everything," Reid corrected. "He still had the land, the cattle, a purpose." He looked at her directly. "Sometimes having a purpose is enough to keep a person going through the worst times." There was something in his eyes, a shadow of old pain that made Dahlia wonder what losses he had endured. Before she could find a way to ask, he straightened, the moment passing. "I should let you finish up here," he said. "But I wanted to tell you a telegram came for you today. I picked it up when I was in town fetching supplies." Dahlia's heart jumped. "From Mr. Harrington," Reid reached into his shirt pocket, producing a folded piece of paper. "See for yourself." With slightly trembling fingers, Dahlia unfolded the telegram. The message was brief but clear. "Regret to hear of your troubles. Stop. Send word when you are ready to continue journey. Stop. Will arrange transportation from Blue Creek. Stop. Arrangement. Stand. Stop. Harrington. He still wants to marry me," Dahlia said, more to herself than to Reid. "Did you expect otherwise?" I wasn't sure. Some men might see a woman who survived a bandit attack as damaged goods. Reid's expression hardened. "Then they're not men worth marrying." The fierceness in his voice surprised her. "Perhaps not, but Mr. Harrington seems willing to overlook my misfortune." "Overlook," Reid echoed. "There's nothing to overlook, Miss Winters. You survived something that would have broken many. If anything, that should raise his estimation of you, not lower it." Dahlia stared at him, caught off guard by his vehemence. "You have an unusual way of looking at things, Mr. MacKenzie. Maybe it's everyone else's way that's unusual." He nodded toward the telegram still in her hand. "So what will you tell him?" Dahlia refolded the paper carefully. "That I've found temporary employment while I recover from my ordeal and will contact him when I'm ready to continue my journey." "And when will that be?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I promised Mr. Dunn at least a month. Beyond that, I suppose it depends on how things unfold." Reid studied her for a long moment. "Well, no need to decide tonight. You've had a long day." As he turned to leave, Dahlia called after him, echoing their conversation from the previous night. "Mr. MacKenzie." When he paused, looking back, she asked, "Why did you really arrange this job for me?" His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Because everyone deserves a choice, Miss Winters, even Boston ladies who think love is a luxury they can't afford." Before she could respond to that remarkably personal observation, he was gone, leaving Dahlia to wonder yet again just what kind of man Reid MacKenzie truly was, and why his opinion of her choices mattered so much to her after just 3 days of acquaintance. The following weeks fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Dahlia rose before dawn each day to help Mrs. Taylor prepare breakfast for the ranch hands. She learned to make biscuits that didn't resemble rocks, to stretch ingredients when supplies ran low, and to manage the organized chaos of feeding 15 hungry men 3 times a day. Between meals, she cleaned the main house, mended clothes for both Frank Dunn and the hands who had no wives to do such work, and gradually took over the ranch accounts from Mrs. Taylor, whose eyesight was failing along with her hands. The work was harder than anything Dahlia had done in her privileged Boston life, but she found an unexpected satisfaction in it. "You're blooming," Mrs. Taylor remarked one afternoon as they worked side by side, preparing vegetables from the kitchen garden for canning. "Like one of those fancy hothouse flowers finally getting real sunshine." Dahlia smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her hand. "I suppose I am, though I'm not sure what my father would think of his daughter with calloused hands and a sunburned nose." "Fathers don't always know what's best for their daughters," Mrs. Taylor said sagely. "Mine wanted me to marry the son of his business partner, a boy with wandering hands and a mean streak. I ran away the night before the wedding, ended up out west as a Harvey girl before meeting my Thomas." "You never went back?" Dahlia asked, curious about this glimpse into the older woman's past. "Never. Wrote to let them know I was alive, but that was it." Mrs. Taylor's gnarled fingers continued expertly peeling potatoes despite her arthritis. "Sometimes you have to choose your own path, even when everyone else thinks you're making a mistake." Dahlia thought of the telegram from James Harrington, tucked away in her valise. She had responded as she told Reid she would, explaining her temporary employment and promising to contact him when she was ready to continue her journey. His reply had been brief but accommodating, suggesting no urgency on his part. "What if you don't know which path is right?" she asked softly. Mrs. Taylor gave her a knowing look. "This is about more than just whether to marry your cattle baron, isn't it?" Dahlia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't know what you mean, don't you?" The older woman glanced meaningfully toward the window, through which they could see Reid working with a young horse in the corral, his movements patient and assured. "I've seen how you look at him when you think no one's watching. Mr. MacKenzie has been kind to me, nothing more," Dahlia insisted, focusing intently on the beans she was stringing. "MMHMM," Mrs. Taylor hummed skeptically. "And I suppose that's why he finds excuses to eat at the house instead of the bunkhouse most nights." or why he's suddenly taken an interest in helping with repairs around the kitchen that have needed fixing for months. Dahlia hadn't allowed herself to notice these patterns, or to acknowledge the warmth that spread through her whenever Reid entered a room. It was foolish, this growing attachment to a man she barely knew, a man who was nothing like the cultured gentleman she had been raised to marry. Even if there were feelings, Dahlia said carefully, they would be impractical. I have an obligation to Mr. Harrington. An obligation based on an arrangement your father made before he lost everything, Mrs. Taylor pointed out. An arrangement with a man you've never met. It's still a commitment I made. A commitment you can unmake if you choose to, Mrs. Taylor set down her knife, fixing Dahlia with a serious look. Life's too short and too hard out here to spend it with someone you don't love, child. Take it from an old woman who knows. The conversation lingered in Dahlia's mind throughout the day and into the evening. As she served supper, she found herself watching Reid more closely, the way he interacted with the other hands, respectful but slightly apart. The quiet authority he carried without seeming to be aware of it, the gentleness in his hands as he passed plates and cups. When the meal was over, Reid lingered as he often did, offering to help bring in more firewood for the kitchen stove. Dahlia followed him outside to the woodpile, the cool evening air a relief after the heat of the kitchen. "You're settling in well," Reid observed as he began stacking logs in his arms. "The men can't stop talking about how much better the food is since you arrived," Dahlia laughed. "That's Mrs. Taylor's doing, not mine. I'm just following her instructions. It's more than that." Reid paused, looking at her directly. In the fading light, his eyes were the color of a storm cloud. "You bring something to this place that it was missing." "And what's that?" Dahlia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Reid seemed to struggle for words, unusual for a man who always seemed to know exactly what to say, even if it was very little. "Life," he finally said. "You bring life." The simple statement struck Dahlia with unexpected force. In Boston, she had been decorative, a pretty ornament in her father's house, destined to be transferred to her husband's keeping. Here, in this rough frontier place, she was necessary. Her work mattered. She mattered. "Thank you," she said softly. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me." Reid looked away, suddenly seeming uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. "Just stating facts, Miss Winters. I think, after all this time, you might call me Dahlia," she suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. Reid's eyes returned to hers, something warm kindling in their depths. "Dahlia," he said, her name sounding different in his voice, richer, more meaningful somehow. "Then I suppose you should call me Reid." "Reid," she echoed, testing the shape of his name in her mouth. A charged silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. For a wild moment, Dahlia thought he might step closer, might even "There you are." Mrs. Taylor's voice broke the spell as she appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mr. Dunn is looking for you, Reid." Something about the new stallion acting up again. Reid straightened, the moment lost. "I'll be right there." He gathered the firewood in his arms. "Good night, Dahlia." "Good night, Reid," she replied, watching him stride away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the gathering darkness. Mrs. Taylor gave her a knowing look as she returned to the kitchen. "Like I said, not just about the cattle baron." Dahlia couldn't find it in herself to deny it anymore. Somehow, in the span of a few short weeks, Reid MacKenzie had become important to her in a way no one ever had before. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying, because what could possibly come of it? A Boston lady, however fallen her circumstances, and a frontier cowboy with secrets in his eyes. It seemed as improbable as snow in July. And yet, as Dahlia prepared for bed that night, she found herself wondering if perhaps improbable things happened all the time in this wild country. After all, wasn't her very presence here alive, safe, and increasingly content improbable enough? The summer heat settled over the double bar like a wool blanket, making the air shimmer above the distant hills and turning the simplest tasks into exercises in endurance. July stretched into August, marking 2 months since Dahlia had arrived at the ranch. 2 months in which she had transformed from a displaced Boston lady to an integral part of the ranch's daily operations. You've got a knack for this life." Frank Dunn told her one evening as she presented him with the monthly accounts, meticulously organized and balanced to the penny. "Never seen the book so tidy." "Thank you," Dahlia replied, pleased with the praise. "I've always had a head for numbers." Dunn studied her over his reading glasses. "Had another telegram from Harrington yesterday, asking after you." Dahlia's stomach tightened. She had exchanged several brief messages with her intended over the past weeks, each one carefully non-committal about when she would resume her journey. "What did you tell him?" "That you're still recovering from your ordeal," Dunn said, his shrewd eyes watching her reaction. "That's what you want me to tell him, isn't it?" "Yes," Dahlia admitted. "Though it's becoming less true with each passing day." Dunn set the account book aside. "Miss Winters, I'm not one to meddle in others' affairs, but it seems to me you're avoiding a decision that needs making." "I know." Dahlia sighed, sinking into the chair across from his desk. "It's just complicated because of MacKenzie." When Dahlia's eyes widened in surprise, Dunn chuckled. "I wasn't born yesterday, Miss Winters. I've seen the way you two look at each other when you think no one's watching." Dahlia felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Is it that obvious to those with eyes to see?" Dunn's expression softened. "He's a good man, MacKenzie, best hand I've ever had, but he's got ghosts that follow him." "What kind of ghosts?" Dahlia asked, unable to help herself. Despite their growing closeness, Reid remained reticent about his past. Dunn shook his head. "Not my story to tell, but if you're considering him as an alternative to Harrington, you should know he's not one to settle easily." The suggestion that she was considering Reid as a potential husband sent a jolt through Dahlia. She had been so focused on her growing feelings that she hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. "I'm not. That is, we haven't." "Of course not," Dunn said, kindly sparing her the struggle to explain. "Just something to think about, now, about these accounts." The conversation shifted to safer ground, but Dunn's words lingered in Dahlia's mind as she left his office. Had she been considering Reid as an alternative to James Harrington? The very idea seemed presumptuous. Reid had shown her kindness, certainly, and there were moments when she thought she glimpsed something deeper in his eyes, but he had never spoken of feelings or a future. Lost in thought, Dahlia nearly collided with Reid himself as she rounded the corner of the house. His hands caught her upper arms to steady her, the touch sending warmth through her despite the summer heat. "Whoa there," he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Where's the fire?" "Sorry," Dahlia stammered, acutely aware of his proximity. "I was distracted." Reid's smile faded as he studied her face. "Something wrong?" "No, just thinking," she managed a smile. "I've been going over the accounts with Mr. Dunn." Reid nodded, releasing her arms but not stepping back. "I'm heading into town tomorrow for supplies. Thought you might want to come along. Mrs. Taylor mentioned you needed some things from the mercantile." The invitation shouldn't have made Dahlia's heart race the way it did. It was practical, nothing more. And yet the prospect of several hours alone with Reid, away from the watchful eyes of the ranch, filled her with both anticipation and nervousness. "I'd like that," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What time will we leave?" "First light, if that's not too early." "Want to beat the worst of the heat?" "I'll be ready." Reid nodded, his eyes lingering on her face a moment longer than necessary. "Good night then, Dahlia." "Good night, Reid." As she watched him walk away, Dahlia couldn't help but think of Dunn's words, ghosts that follow him. What secrets did Reid MacKenzie carry? And would knowing them change how she felt about him? The next morning dawned clear and already warm, promising another scorching day. Dahlia was ready when Reid brought the wagon around, dressed in the simplest of her dresses with a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. Mrs. Taylor had provided them with a basket of food for the journey: bread, cheese, and apples along with a jug of water. "Try not to tarry in town too long," the older woman advised as Dahlia climbed onto the wagon seat. "Storms brewing to the west, might hit by late afternoon." Reid glanced at the clear sky dubiously. "Don't see any signs of it." "My joints say different," Mrs. Taylor insisted. "And they're never wrong about rain." With a promise to heed her warning, they set off, the wagon creaking beneath them as they followed the rutted track toward Blue Creek. Dahlia was acutely aware of Reid beside her, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-bronzed forearms, his profile strong against the morning light. For the first few miles, they rode in comfortable silence, the kind that can only exist between people who have grown accustomed to each other's presence. Finally, Reid spoke. "You've changed since I found you on that road," he observed, his eyes on the trail ahead. Dahlia glanced at him, surprised by the observation. "Have I, MMHMM?" Reid nodded. "You carry yourself different, more, I don't know, solid maybe, solid," Dahlia laughed. "That's not typically considered a compliment for a lady." Reid's mouth quirked in that half-smile she had come to cherish. "Wasn't meant as an insult, just that you seem more certain of yourself, like you've found your footing." Dahlia considered this. "I suppose I have, in a way. In Boston, everything was prescribed: how to dress, how to speak, who to marry. Out here, I'm discovering who I am when those constraints are removed." "And who is that?" Reid asked, his voice quiet but intent. "I'm not entirely sure yet," Dahlia admitted. "But I think I like her better than the person I was before." Reid's eyes met hers briefly, something warm in their depths. "I like her too." The simple statement sent a rush of pleasure through Dahlia. They lapsed into silence again, but it was charged now with unspoken possibilities. As they approached Blue Creek, Dahlia found herself thinking of the first time she had seen the town exhausted, traumatized, with nothing but a torn dress and a hidden derringer to her name. Now, just 2 months later, she returned with money she had earned herself in her pocket, and a growing confidence in her ability to survive whatever life threw at her. The town was busy with morning activity, shopkeepers opening their establishments, women doing their marketing, cowboys and settlers going about their business. Several people greeted Reid by name as they made their way to the mercantile, their curious gazes sliding to Dahlia with varying degrees of subtlety. "Everyone's staring," she murmured as they entered the store. "Small town," Reid replied simply. "Not much happens here that doesn't become everyone's business." The mercantile owner greeted them warmly, especially pleased to see Dahlia. "Miss Winters, good to see you looking so well. We were all mighty concerned after your unfortunate arrival." "Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. I've been fortunate in finding good people to help me recover," she replied, with a glance at Reid, who was already examining a display of tools. While Reid gathered the supplies needed for the ranch, Dahlia selected the items on Mrs. Taylor's list along with a few personal necessities. As she was examining a bolt of fabric, considering whether she could afford to make herself a new dress, she overheard 2 women talking in the next aisle. "That's her, the Boston lady who's been staying out at the double bar," one whispered none too quietly. "Working as a housekeeper, if you can believe it. I heard she was supposed to be a mail-order bride for James Harrington over in Wyoming," the other replied. "Wonder why she's still here." "Well, just look at who she came to town with," the first woman said meaningfully. "MacKenzie's had a reputation as a loner since he arrived, but he's hardly let that woman out of his sight from what I hear. Scandal, if you ask me. A lady of her background taking up with a cowhand. Ladies." Reid's voice cut through the gossip, startling the women who hadn't realized he had approached. "Fine day, isn't it?" The women mumbled embarrassed greetings and hurried away, leaving Reid standing beside a mortified Dahlia. "I'm sorry about that," he said quietly. "Small towns and idle tongues." "It's not your fault," Dahlia replied, setting the fabric back on the shelf, her earlier enthusiasm dimmed. "But perhaps they have a point. I've been delaying a decision I need to make." Reid's expression shuddered slightly. "About Harrington?" "Yes." Dahlia met his gaze directly. "I can't keep him waiting indefinitely. It's not fair to him or to Mr. Dunn, who hired me temporarily, or to—" she hesitated, "or to myself." "What's stopping you?" Reid asked, his voice carefully neutral. "From deciding, I mean." The real answer him, Reid MacKenzie, was what was stopping her hung unspoken between them. But Dahlia couldn't say it, not here in the mercantile with curious eyes watching, not when she had no idea if he felt the same growing attachment that she did. "I'm not sure," she said instead. "Fear, perhaps, of making the wrong choice." Reid studied her face for a long moment. Sometimes there is no right or wrong choice, just different paths leading to different lives. That doesn't make it any easier to choose between them. No, he agreed softly, it doesn't. The moment was interrupted by Mr. Jenkins calling Reid over to discuss an order of fence wire, leaving Dahlia to finish her shopping with a troubled heart. By the time they had paid for their purchases and loaded everything into the wagon, the sky to the west had darkened ominously, just as Mrs. Taylor had predicted. "We should head back," Reid said, eyeing the approaching storm. "Try to beat the worst of it." They set off at a faster pace than their morning journey, but the storm moved more quickly than anticipated. They were still 10 miles from the ranch when the first fat raindrops began to fall, quickly becoming a deluge that turned the dirt road to mud and reduced visibility to mere yards. "There's a line shack about half a mile ahead," Reid shouted over the downpour. "We can wait it out there." Dahlia nodded, clutching her sodden skirts and trying to see through the curtain of rain. By the time the small cabin came into view, they were both drenched to the skin, and the supplies in the wagon were at risk of being ruined despite the tarp Reid had thrown over them. The line shack was simple, a one-room structure with a small stove, a narrow cot, a rough table with 2 chairs, and shelves stocked with basic provisions for cowboys working the distant parts of the ranch. Reid hurried to light the stove while Dahlia stood dripping on the plank floor, suddenly acutely aware of their isolation and proximity. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," Reid said practically, rummaging through a trunk at the foot of the cot. "Here." He handed her a faded flannel shirt and a pair of trousers that would be comically large on her. "They're clean enough. I'll step outside while you change." "You'll get even more soaked," Dahlia protested. "I'll check on the horses," Reid insisted, already heading for the door. "Take your time." Alone in the cabin, Dahlia quickly stripped off her sodden dress and petticoats, hanging them near the stove to dry. The men's clothing swallowed her. She had to roll the trouser legs and sleeves multiple times, but they were dry and surprisingly soft from many washings. She was just finishing buttoning the shirt when Reid knocked on the door. "Decent?" he called. "Yes," she answered. Suddenly shy, Reid entered, water streaming from his hat and coat. He stopped short at the sight of her in the oversized clothes, something flashing in his eyes that made Dahlia's breath catch. Then he looked away, removing his dripping hat and coat. "Storms set in for a while," he said, hanging his wet things by the door. "Might as well make ourselves comfortable." Dahlia nodded, painfully aware of how improper their situation was, alone in a remote cabin, potentially for hours. If the gossips in Blue Creek could see them now, their whispers would become shouts. "I'll make some coffee," she offered, needing something to do with her hands. "And we have Mrs. Taylor's food." Reid nodded, moving to the small window to stare out at the sheeting rain. His shirt was plastered to his back, revealing the lean strength of his shoulders and spine. Dahlia forced herself to focus on the task at hand, finding the coffee and pot with determined concentration. As she worked, the small stove began to warm the cabin, creating a cozy atmosphere despite the storm raging outside. When the coffee was ready, she poured 2 cups and brought one to Reid, who still stood by the window. "Thank you," he said, accepting the cup. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange, sending a shiver through her that had nothing to do with her damp hair or the rain. "You should change too," Dahlia suggested, gesturing to his wet shirt. "You'll catch your death." Reid hesitated, then nodded. "Turn around." Dahlia obediently faced the stove, listening to the soft sounds of fabric as Reid changed his shirt. Her imagination painted vivid pictures of what she wasn't seeing, making her cheeks flush with heat that had nothing to do with the fire. "All right," he said after a moment. When she turned back, he was wearing a dry shirt, similar to the one he had given her but newer. The sight of them both in nearly matching attire struck Dahlia as strangely intimate, as if they were playing at being husband and wife in this tiny cabin while the storm raged outside. The thought brought both warmth and confusion. This wasn't the life she had been raised for: simple cabins and practical clothes, work-roughened hands and the honest fatigue of physical labor. And yet, in the past 2 months, She had found more genuine satisfaction in this frontier existence than in all her years in Boston society. "Penny for your thoughts," Reid said, breaking into her reverie. Dahlia smiled slightly. "I'm not sure they're worth that much. Try me." She hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I was thinking about how different my life is now from what I expected. And how strangely content I am with that difference." Reid's expression softened. "The frontier has a way of stripping things down to what matters, no room for pretense when you're focused on survival." "Is that why you came west?" Dahlia asked, seizing the opening to learn more about his past. "To strip away pretense?" Reid was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if it held answers. Finally, he said, "I came west because there was nothing left for me in the East, not after the war." Dahlia remembered he had mentioned fighting for the South, barely old enough to hold a rifle. "You lost someone," she guessed softly. "Everyone," Reid corrected, his voice flat. "My family had a small farm in Virginia. When the war came, my father and older brother joined up right away. I followed as soon as I could lie convincingly about my age. By the time it was over, they were both dead, and my mother and sisters had died of typhoid that swept through the refugee camps." Dahlia's heart ached for the young boy he must have been, returning from war to find everything he loved gone. "I'm so sorry, Reid," he shrugged, the gesture at odds with the pain evident in his eyes. "It was a long time ago, but it still follows you, your ghosts." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Reid's gaze sharpened. "Done been talking," he only said. "You had ghosts, nothing specific." Dahlia set her cup down, taking a step closer to him. "Everyone has a past, Reid. It doesn't define who you are now, doesn't it?" His voice was bitter. "I was 16 when I killed my first man. Blue uniform instead of gray, but a man all the same. I've been running from that boy ever since." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way few people ever allowed themselves to be. Dahlia knew she should be shocked, perhaps even frightened by this glimpse of darkness. Instead, she felt only a deepening connection to the complex man before her. "You were a child in an impossible situation," she said quietly. "And you've spent the years since then helping others like a woman sitting in the dust with a torn dress." Reid looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing something new. "Why aren't you afraid of me? You should be." "Because I see you," Dahlia replied simply. "Not just what you've done or what's been done to you, but who you are now. A man who stops for strangers in distress, who arranges jobs for displaced Boston ladies, who treats horses with gentleness and old women with respect." Without conscious thought, she reached out, placing her hand on his arm. "The ghosts are part of you, Reid, but they're not all of you." For a heartbeat, he remained still under her touch. Then, with a suddenness that startled her, he set down his cup and pulled her against him, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that contained all the words they hadn't been able to say. Dahlia froze for only a moment before responding, her arms sliding around his neck as she pressed closer. The kiss deepened. Months of unspoken longing poured into this single point of connection. Reid's hands spanned her waist, strong and sure through the borrowed shirt, holding her as if she were something precious. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Reid rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I found you on that road," he admitted roughly, "even covered in dust with a torn dress," Dahlia asked, a smile in her voice, "especially then." His thumb traced her cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. "You looked so damn brave, sitting there with your chin up like you were daring the world to try and break you." Dahlia laughed softly, joy bubbling up within her. "And here I thought I looked a complete disaster." "Beautiful," Reid corrected. "Stronger than any silk, remember." The reminder of his first words to her brought fresh tears to Dahlia's eyes, happy ones this time. "I remember." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the small cabin, something new and fragile was taking root. As Reid lowered his head to kiss her again, Dahlia knew with sudden certainty that her decision about which path to take had already been made. The only question that remained was whether Reid MacKenzie was ready to stop running from his ghosts and build a future with her. The storm passed by evening, leaving behind a washed, clean world and muddy roads that would make travel difficult. Reid and Dahlia stayed the night in the lined shack, he on the floor despite her protests, she on the narrow cot, and returned to the double bar the following morning. If anyone noticed the change between them, the lingering glances, the careful distance they now maintained in public, no one commented directly. Mrs. Taylor, however, gave Dahlia a knowing look when she returned to the kitchen, still wearing her mudded dress from the day before. "Storm caught you, did it?" "Yes," Dahlia replied, feeling a blush creep up her neck. "We had to take shelter in one of the lined shacks, MMHMM," the older woman hummed. "And did you find more than shelter out there?" Dahlia busied herself with the breakfast preparations, avoiding Mrs. Taylor's shrewd gaze. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you are," Mrs. Taylor said gently. "Just remember, child feelings found in a storm need to weather the clear skies too." The cryptic warning stayed with Dahlia throughout the day as she resumed her duties. She and Reid had shared something profound in that cabin, but neither had spoken of what would come next. Her obligation to James Harrington still existed. The gossip in town would only intensify if she broke that arrangement for a ranch hand, no matter how exceptional a man he was. For the next week, she and Reid circled each other carefully, their feelings acknowledged in private moments, but never discussed in the light of day. A brush of hands when passing the salt at dinner. A stolen kiss behind the barn when no one was looking. Whispered conversations under the stars after the household had gone to bed. It was sweet torture, this in-between state, not quite courting, not quite secret lovers. Dahlia knew they were postponing the inevitable conversation about their future, both perhaps afraid of what the other would say. The decision was forced upon them by the arrival of another telegram, this one more demanding than the previous messages from James Harrington. "Require definitive answer regarding our arrangement. Stop. Will arrive Blue Creek September 15. To escort you personally if agreeable. Stop. Please respond. Stop." Harrington. Frank Dunn handed her the telegram with a sympathetic look. "Seems your intended is growing impatient." Dahlia stared at the paper, the words swimming before her eyes. September 15 was just a week away. "Yes, it seems so. You'll need to give him an answer," Dunn said gently, "one way or the other." "I know." Dahlia folded the telegram carefully, her mind racing. "Thank you for bringing this to me." "What will you tell him?" Dunn asked, his direct manner as always cutting to the heart of the matter. Dahlia met his gaze steadily. "The truth, that my circumstances have changed since we made our arrangement." Dunn nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good, MacKenzie's in the north pasture." "Thought you might want to know." With a grateful smile for his understanding, Dahlia hurried to change into her riding boots and borrowed a horse from the stable. She had become a competent rider during her time at the double bar, though she still preferred the smaller, more docile mares to the spirited geldings the Cowboys favored. The north pasture was a 30-minute ride from the main house, a stretch of land bordered by a creek on one side and rolling hills on the other. She found Reid mending a section of fence, his shirt darkened with sweat from the late summer heat. He looked up at the sound of approaching hoofbeats, his expression changing from concentration to concern when he saw her. "Dahlia," he set down his tools, moving to help her dismount. "What's wrong?" Wordlessly, she handed him the telegram. Reid read it quickly, his face giving nothing away. "I see. I need to give him an answer," Dahlia said, "and I can't do that without knowing where we stand, you and I." Reid ran a hand through his hair, his gaze moving to the distant hills. "What do you want me to say, Dahlia?" "The truth," she replied, frustration edging into her voice. "Do you want me to stay? Do you see a future for us? Or was what happened in that cabin just a moment that meant nothing beyond itself?" "You know it wasn't," Reid said, his voice rough. "But that doesn't change the facts. You're a Boston lady, educated and refined." "I'm a cowhand with nothing to my name but a horse and saddle. What kind of future could I offer you?" "The kind where we face life together," Dahlia replied fiercely. "I don't need silk dresses and fancy houses, Reid. I need someone who sees me for who I am, not what I represent or what I can bring to a marriage." Reid's expression softened. "You deserve better than a life of struggle, Dahlia. That's not for you to decide." She stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her palm. I want a choice in my own fate, remember? That's what you said you wanted for me. Well, I choose you, if you'll have me. The words hung between them, honest and bare. Reid covered her hand with his own, his calloused fingers engulfing hers. You'd give up security for me, a respectable marriage, the chance to return to the kind of life you were raised for, in a heartbeat, Dahlia answered without hesitation. Those things mean nothing without love. Reid's eyes darkened. Is that what this is? Love, yes, Dahlia said simply. For me, at least. For a long moment, Reid stood still, his eyes searching hers as if looking for any sign of doubt. Then slowly, reverently, he raised her hand to his lips. I've loved you since I found you on that road, he confessed. Stronger than any silk, remember? I just never thought a woman like you could love a man like me. Joy blossomed in Dahlia's chest, spreading warmth through her entire being. Then you've underestimated me, Mr. MacKenzie. Reid laughed, the sound rich with happiness, and pulled her into his arms. It seems I have, Miss Winters. A mistake I won't make again. Their kiss was different from those they had shared in the line shack, not desperate or hungry, but deep and sure, a promise of all that was to come. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Reid kept his arms around her. So, he said, how do we tell Mr. Harrington his bride has chosen a different path? Honestly, Dahlia replied. I'll meet him when he arrives and explain in person. I owe him that much. Reid nodded, respect in his eyes, and after, Dahlia smiled, a vision of their future unfolding before her. After we begin our life together, whatever that looks like. It might not be easy, Reid warned, ever practical. I've saved some money, enough for a small place of our own someday, but starting out will be hard work. I'm not afraid of hard work, Dahlia reminded him. These past months have taught me that I'm capable of far more than I ever knew. Reid's answering smile was tender. That you are, Dahlia Winters, that you are. They rode back to the ranch together, plans and dreams taking shape between them. Frank Dunn received the news of their engagement with a satisfied nod, as if he had expected nothing less. Mrs. Taylor wept happy tears and immediately began planning what simple foods could be stretched to create a wedding feast. The days leading up to James Harrington's arrival passed in a blur of preparations and anticipation. Dahlia sent a telegram informing him that she would meet him as arranged, but that her circumstances had changed. His reply was brief and noncommittal, giving no indication of his reaction to this news. On the morning of September 15, Dahlia and Reid rode into Blue Creek together. They had decided she would meet with Harrington alone first, out of respect, but Reid would be nearby if needed. As the stagecoach pulled into town, Dahlia straightened her spine, drawing on the strength she had discovered within herself during these past months. James Harrington proved to be exactly as described in his letters, a tall, distinguished man in his 40s with silver threading his dark hair, and an air of confidence that spoke of his success. He spotted Dahlia immediately as he descended from the stagecoach, recognition in his eyes despite never having seen her before. "Miss Winters, I presume?" he said, approaching with a courteous nod. "Mr. Harrington," Dahlia acknowledged. "Thank you for coming. Shall we speak privately?" "The hotel has a small parlor we could use," Harrington agreed, and they walked in silence to the Blue Creek Hotel. Mrs. Porter, who had been informed of the situation, discreetly showed them to the parlor before withdrawing. Once alone, Dahlia faced the man she had once agreed to marry. "I owe you an explanation," she began. Harrington held up a hand. "Before you continue, Miss Winters, may I speak frankly?" Surprised, Dahlia nodded. "I entered into our arrangement for practical reasons," Harrington said. "I need a wife to help manage my household and provide companionship in my later years. Your father assured me you were well-bred, educated, and amenable to such an arrangement. When I received your first telegram about the stagecoach attack, I was concerned for your welfare. But as your stay in this town extended, I began to wonder if perhaps your circumstances had indeed changed more fundamentally than you were admitting." Dahlia's respect for the man grew as he spoke. "You're very perceptive, Mr. Harrington." "I've built my business on understanding people, Miss Winters. A small smile touched his lips, and I recognized the look of a woman who has found something or someone she values more than security. Relief washed through Dahlia. "Yes," she admitted, "I have." "I'm very sorry for any inconvenience I've caused you." Harrington waved away her apology. "Better to discover such things before vows are exchanged. I wish you happiness, Miss Winters, truly, and I thank you for the courtesy of telling me in person." They parted on surprisingly cordial terms, with Harrington returning to the stagecoach station to arrange his journey back to Wyoming. As Dahlia watched him go, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the last obligation of her old life fulfilled, leaving her free to embrace the new one she had chosen. Reid was waiting for her outside the hotel, tension evident in the set of his shoulders until he saw her smile. "All well?" he asked as she approached. "All well," Dahlia confirmed, slipping her hand into his. Mr. Harrington was remarkably understanding. "He's a smart man, then," Reid said, squeezing her fingers gently. "Any man would be a fool to hold onto a woman whose heart belongs elsewhere." Dahlia leaned into him slightly, public propriety be damned. "And where does my heart belong, Mr. MacKenzie?" Reid's eyes crinkled at the corners, that half-smile she loved so much playing on his lips. "With a man who will never stop being grateful that he happened upon a lady sitting in the dust with a torn dress." "The best wrong turn you ever took," Dahlia teased. "The only right one I've ever made," Reid corrected, his voice soft with emotion. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church at the end of Blue Creek's Main Street. Frank Dunn stood as Reid's best man, while Mrs. Taylor, weeping happily, stood with Dahlia. The entire ranch turned out for the celebration that followed, a joyous gathering that lasted well into the night. Reid had indeed saved enough for a small place of their own 40 acres with a creek running through it, adjacent to the double bar. Frank Dunn, who had come to view Dahlia as the daughter he'd never had, sold it to them at a price well below its value, insisting it was a wedding gift. "Besides," he added gruffly, "this way I keep my best hand and my housekeeper close by. Pure self-interest on my part." They moved into their new home, a small but sturdy cabin that they would expand as time and resources allowed on a crisp autumn day when the cottonwoods along the creek were turning gold. That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Dahlia traced the scar on Reid's temple with gentle fingers. "Happy?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "You gave me a choice, Reid, a real choice about my own life." "That's a gift beyond measure. You gave me something greater," he said, gathering her closer. "A reason to stop running, a future worth building." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, Dahlia thought of that dusty road where their story had begun. How strange and wonderful that her greatest misfortune had led to her greatest joy. Life had a way of weaving patterns too complex to see when you were in the midst of them. But now, safely held in the arms of the man who had seen her strength when she was at her weakest, Dahlia could trace the threads that had brought her here. Every step, every choice, every moment of courage had led to this, a love as vast as the Montana sky and as enduring as the mountains that cradled their home. In the years that followed, the small cabin grew, room by room, as their family expanded, first with a daughter who inherited her mother's determination and her father's steady calm, then with twin boys who brought joyful chaos to their once quiet homestead. The 40 acres became 80, then 120, as Reid's skill with horses and cattle built them a modest but comfortable living. Dahlia never regretted her decision. There were hard times, of course, drought years when the creek ran dry, winters when the snow piled higher than the fence posts, the terrible spring when influenza swept through the valley claiming lives, including dear Mrs. Taylor. But through it all, Reid remained her constant, her partner in every sense of the word. And on summer evenings, when the work was done and the children were playing in the yard, they would sometimes sit together on the porch of the home they had built, watching the sun set behind the mountains. In those quiet moments, Dahlia would remember a different woman, sitting in the dust with a torn dress, and marvel at how far she had come. "What are you thinking about?" Reid would ask, his hair now threaded with silver but his eyes still the same storm cloud gray that had first captured her heart. And Dahlia would smile, leaning her head against the shoulder of the man who had taught her that strength came in many forms, and that love was not a luxury but the most essential thing of all. "I'm thinking that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she would answer. "And that's silk tears, but we endure."